Welcome. We're going to have a really good time talking about therapeutic treatment, teaching, implementation plans. See, even Lucy's excited about them. I can't even remember what to call them. It's been a crazy day. I am very excited. If you are here, I would love to hear from you. So drop what kind of class you're teaching in the comments and any questions that you have. I would love to hear them. I'm going to share a couple tips to get us started. And this is just, a lot of us wear lanyards. I love to have visual cueing lanyards. And if you are looking for a way to make visuals to be very durable, so if you have students who really mess up visuals and have a tendency to tear them up or things like that, go to your local redesign center, Home Depot, Lowe's, anywhere like that. See if you can get them to give you laminate counter samples. They are already cut. They usually already have a hole punched in them. And you can use packing tape or Gorilla Tape to put your visuals on them, and it will make them extremely durable. We used to use it for some kids that we had that would bite visuals. Now, the way they make them now, they used to come with curved corners, which was really nice. Now they come with sharp corners, so you may have to file them a little bit just to make them soft because they are kind of sharp. But it just saves that if you want to make them a little bit more durable, that's going to be a really useful thing. So that is my first tip of the day. That was not meant to be a pun, although it did kind of work out that way. So I would love to know who you are. So definitely share in the comments and let me know that you're here and that you're listening. I'm going to open up, make sure I can see the comments. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think everyone can hear me, because we are going to talk about the teaching implementation plan today. And clearly, without my visual cues, I am not able to talk today since I keep forgetting what the T stands for in a form that I actually created. I want to talk a little bit about the tip because I know it sometimes feels like it is another piece of things we have to do. Hey, Megan, I'm so glad you're here. You're from Florida. So you are here with me in the hot and sweaty weather. I know sometimes the tip feels like an added layer of paper, and Lord knows we don't need any more paper in our world, but I do think that it is worth our time for a variety of reasons. So I want to share some of those reasons with you today. I want to go over just to share with you. I've been talking. Hi, Shani from the UK. Wow. Oh, so it's evening for you already. Great. Thank you for being here. I want to share with you just kind of our steps in our core classroom development process. I use the teaching implementation plan, which you will sometimes hear me call the teaching intervention plan, which is what I used to call it. We used to just call it the teaching plan. And the whole point of it is to learn about our students. And that is really the first step in creating an organized classroom. From that, we then can develop our schedule, develop our physical space, and then work on building our classroom teams and organizing our staff. And those are actually going to be the next steps of our discussions over the next few Thursdays as we go through these Facebook Lives. So those are going to be the pieces I'm going to talk about over our next set of lives over the Thursdays that I've scheduled. And it really all comes down to this. And if you've listened to the podcast, you've had to listen to my awful British accent, which I will spare you from today, of well begun is half done. And when I heard this, it was like, wow, that is like exactly what I mean. And Mary Poppins had it right that putting the time in up front really does pay off. And I think in classroom design, I hate to take time away from the summer because I truly do believe you need it. But I do believe that spending some time near to when school is beginning, putting in the time to get organized is really helpful. So this is just a front page of the tip. And it is just a way of passing information, hopefully on to next year's teacher or getting information from last year's teacher. I find it useful to have as a reference so I can see quickly what the reinforcers are. Do I have a behavior plan? Are there medical concerns? So this is just a place where I can put information that I need to know, so I can get a quick glimpse of information, and I can record as I go through the IEP things like what kind of staff training do I need? Do I need to find an AAC device for the student? Things like that. So part of the tip process is really to make sure that we're going through the IEPs, that we're looking at them, we're getting to know our students and things like that. Hi, Rebecca from Kansas. Functional life skills. Awesome. Sarah from Houston. Colette from New Jersey. Kindergarten to 1. Self-contained. Awesome. So glad to have you guys here. So this is just getting some basic information that will be helpful when you go to set up your classroom, because you're going to know what kind of work system they might need, what kind of schedule they might need. If you know where they left off in their curriculum, you won't be able to find all this information in some of your IEPs, but if you can, it's useful just to have it in one place. And this is really the meat of the tip, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. But it really is taking the IEP and really thinking about where can I get the most opportunities to teach it, to teach this goal or objective. How are we generalizing it? How are we using it? How are we instructing it? How are we teaching it? How are we measuring progress? And what materials do I need to make or gather for it? Hi, Deanne. It's good to see you. Getting organized, going to a new school, and have no summer break because you're teaching ESY, but thank you so much for teaching ESY. I know that's a huge sacrifice, especially this year, but oh, your students are so lucky that you're doing it. It's so hard. I know how hard it was for people to get that staff this year. So if we look at it, we're really looking at our primary teaching activity being, where are we really getting our repetitions for this skill of teaching it? Where are we getting the most bang for our buck? And where are we taking our data? Our incidental opportunities are, where is the skill generalizing? Where is he also using it, but we're not really tracking it? It's not our prime teaching activity. How are we teaching the skill? So what exactly is the strategy that we're using for instruction? Might be a curriculum, might be a specific strategy like a picture exchange communication system, specifically to teach a skill. And then how are we tracking its progress? So for each goal objective, you're going to have that information in one place. So here you see we've got a student who needs to complete a multi-step task independently, using visual supports. Well, that lends itself completely to an independent work system, but he also has a vocational time during his day that we can build a schedule system into it. But we also build a visual schedule into cooking activities in the classroom, into art activities in the classroom, and sometimes we even use them in his instructional times to let him know how much is expected of him. So in his primary activities right here, we're really working on getting the repetitions, or what I think of as our strength training, where we're getting our reps in for teaching. And then this is where we're just doing our incidental instruction, our naturalistic, not naturalistic, but our generalization. Where else are we using the skill? And then we're going to take data on it. So we're doing it in independent work is where we're getting our most opportunities to practice. And then we're taking data with an independent work data sheet that's specifically measuring how independent he is at the system. Because of course, everything we put into an independent work system has to be already mastered. So we're not working on the work, we're working on the system because we're working on measuring independence. And then this is just a high school one that I really like how this teacher had integrated this student's goals into her community-based instruction, for instance. So she was going to select a magazine of her choice during her community-based instruction, read an article from the magazine, and answer comprehension questions. So she was going to do that in her CBI and her work site. That was where her primary teaching activity was going to be. Her incidental opportunities are whenever she had newspapers or books to look at, We had a task analysis and video. She responded really well to video modeling, so we were using that as a strategy. And then we had a weekly checklist, and really it was kind of a rubric. It was before we started really looking at rubrics as a measure for her. And we did that on a weekly basis. So this also becomes part of your data plan. So remember, and I've got a couple podcasts that are coming up pretty soon talking about the fact that you want to make a plan for your data. And I've got a free webinar on that to help you make a plan and think about planning out your data, because it's about quality of data more than quantity of data. And so your tip is part of making that plan. So it helps you build your other systems. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important. So why do we want to use the tip? Why do we want to take this extra step? When I can kind of hear people saying to me, why do I have to do more paperwork? Why are you asking me to do this? Well, one is that it reviews the IEP. When I started doing them, when I created them, one reason that we added them to our system of setting up classes is because when I finished them, I knew the kids. I knew what their IEPs were because I'd gone through and I'd really dissected the information. So it became very clear to me what each student needed and was going to go into that. When you finish with the tip, you've really thought through what the instruction needs to look like for each child's IEP. So it's more than just taking information in through reading the IEP. You've really thought the information out, essentially, because you've really thought through how and what instruction is needed. And so you've already kind of thought through a lot of the elements that are going to go into your schedule in terms of activities. And I'll talk about that in a minute as well. It also makes sure that your every goal and objective gets connected to a data collection system, but it also gets connected to a teaching strategy, so that should anybody ever say, but how are you teaching that? You've got a strategy, you've got a curriculum. Well, I'm teaching that with this method, or I'm teaching that with this strategy. And that goes a long way to building trust, to building credibility with being able to talk about how we teach, which is becoming increasingly important. And it also makes sure that you've got a data collection system in place for every goal and objective. It helps you organize your schedule because, as I said, you've already thought about what activities you're going to need. Because then when you've gone through the tips of all your students, when you've created them, then you kind of know, oh, in this year's class, I'm going to need a lot of small group instruction because these are not kids who learn complex material in large groups. Or these are students who really need a lot of socialization opportunities and they need a lot more whole group time than maybe last year's class did. Because those of you who've been doing this a while have learned that this year's class may not look like next year's class. So you know that even though you have the same name to your class, what your class's schedule looks like, what your day looks like, may look very different depending on the actual students on your caseload. So going through this process allows you to really think about what your schedule is going to look like to meet those needs of those IEPs. One of the things that happened when I created the tip was my sister, who taught special ed for 38 years. Well, she taught regular ed and special ed for 38 years. One of the things she said to me is, that's what every good teacher does in their head. I mean, that's what we all do. We all have already thought about this. And I'm like, yeah, I was doing it at the time because I was working with staff that didn't necessarily have a lot of experience as a teacher. But one of the things I came to realize was it's all great that you've done it in your head, but we live in a world now in which we need to be able to communicate with a lot more staff. So the fact that I've done this in my head doesn't tell the para what I need them to do. It doesn't tell the para why I don't want her to write his name on his paper during that lesson, because I targeted that as a primary teaching opportunity for him for that skill. So it's a great way to communicate with staff. It's also a really great way to communicate with staff because if you think about IEPs, it's critical that paraprofessionals be aware of the students' IEPs. But if you think about reading an IEP, now if you've done this for a while, you're probably pretty good at just screening out the legalese in the IEPs. Having read IEPs from so many different states, even for me, it trips me up because they all look different. So one of the things that I have found over the years is that one of the things I like about the tip is it strips all that away and you really get the bulk. Now, they still need to read the present level and the profile and things like that because that is still all in the IEP. But when you're handing them a tip, they're getting not just the goals and objectives, but they're getting where and how we're actually implementing them. So they're seeing how it's getting implemented. So it's kind of like a blueprint or a shop drawing of what to do with it. So they're getting more information about how it's going to be done. And that's really useful for communicating with the staff because they don't know what's in your head if you don't tell them. And if it's written out, that saves you the time of telling them. So if you can walk them through one of them, then they can understand how it's going to be done. And finally, it's a really good way to communicate with families. Families are going on a leap of trust with us, especially if they've just met you, because they don't necessarily know what your background is, how an IEP is going to be implemented, and they are putting their trust in the school that we will implement the IEP. That is the implicit contract that we are making with them with an IEP. We are all agreeing on the goals, and the parents are leaving the methodology up to the school. That's what the courts have said they have to do. Well, that means that they are entrusting us to do that, but they don't necessarily know what that looks like. So for the family, sometimes sharing the tip with them can help them see, oh, so that independent work stuff where it looks like you're doing busy work, these are the skills you're actually working on during that time. Oh, so when I take him out early and he misses recess, that was actually a teaching time for him for social skills. Oh, so they can see what those activities are meaning for that student. So it really helps them understand what those times look like for them and how it translates into the implementation. So I think those are really good reasons for using it. How does it help you longer term in the classroom? Hi, Joanne. It's good to see you from New Jersey. Um, how does it help you longer term? Because I think that there are advantages to the tip that go beyond just setting up the classroom. One is, oh, how does it, sorry, I've blocked my visual cues with all of my boxes. So how does it help us set up the classroom? Well, one is when you've done your tip, you have an idea of what activities you need in your schedule because those are your primary and your incidental opportunities. You may have to go back and tweak them when you go, well, now I have a whole bunch of things that don't match up for my kids. So now I got to figure out what things I combine into something else. Your data collection processes are already identified. If I'm very specific in my tip, I can go through and pull all my data sheets by going through my tip. And that was one of the reasons we always did them when we put a classroom together. Your staff training gets outlined because now I know if I am thinking, okay, I'm going to have somebody running discrete trials, I know that I need somebody to do this. I've identified areas that I need to make sure everybody in the room needs to know how to do for these students, and I've already listed that on that front page. It also means that my student groupings get easier because, not that they're actually easy, but because I have thought through how I am, who my kids are. I've learned about them, and I can kind of see whose goals are similar, whose goals are different, who might be good together in instruction. Do I want to put them together by independence? Do I want to put them together by skills? It gives me, I have a better idea of who the students are. And it makes meet the parents before school a little easier because I have a good idea of who the students are. Whoops. Because, and this is just my little soapbox moment, if you'll just indulge me for a moment, we have to get to know the students before they come into the classroom because we are responsible for implementing their IEP from the moment they start coming to school. And I've met a lot of teachers over the years who, say, well, We don't, I don't like to prejudge. So I don't like to read their IEPs before they come in. So I want you to think about these two teachers, and I want you to imagine that you are a parent. Um, and I want you to imagine that you are a parent bringing your child to Naomi's room. And so Naomi comes out, she meets you at the door during open house, she talks to your child, she gives him a favorite toy that she learned about from reading his IEP to engage him. And she shows you that she set up a communication station. She shows you where his explicit instruction time is going to take place because that's in his IEP. She talks about what his goals are. She talks about him as if she knows him. She talks about the things that she's read. Now, does she know everything about him? Certainly not. She knows him from a piece of paper. But she talks about him based on what she's read. She brings reinforcers, things that she's learned about him from reading that paper. And she asks questions, obviously. Things have changed over the summer. Certainly this year, things are going to be different. I don't know how accurate the IEP is. I don't know when it was updated. I don't know the assessment. I mean, I know this year is weird. And I think the parents know that too. So, we all are in the same boat in that respect. But she's making an effort, and that's huge. That's different than Danny. Now imagine that you're a parent bringing your child to Danny's classroom. Danny meets you at the door and asks if this is your child, as opposed to somebody else's kid that you brought with you. She lets him wander around the classroom. She doesn't give him anything to engage with while she's talking to you. And you're constantly having to redirect him. She asks, what does he like to do? Even though you've already filled out a reinforcer preference every year since he was 2, and it's in his file. She asks what skill he's working on and if there are any medical conditions that she should be aware of, which should be in his IEP. And she keeps asking these questions that you're thinking, that should be in his file. It's kind of like, I was really excited recently. I went for just a routine doctor's visit, and for the first time ever, they didn't make me recite my list of medications that they make me fill out on an electronic survey before I arrive at the doctor's appointment. I'm like, I just filled that out. Why do I have to tell you this again? I'm like, oh my gosh, I think they finally got it. It's very frustrating. It's like, why do I do this if then you have to ask me this? Who do you think a family is going to feel more comfortable with? I'm thinking if it's me, I'm going to feel like Naomi's got it on the ball. I'm going to wonder if Danny is really just walked in the door. And, I understand that in some district, Danny did just walk in the door. So trust me, I get it. And sometimes there's no way around it. Sometimes you didn't get the IEP. So I know that, you can only do what you can do. And I'm going to be the first one to tell you that. You can only do what you can do, and don't stay up at night when you don't have the IEP before open house. You can't control that. But when you have it and you don't read it, it's a different story. And Lucy's going to contribute to our conversation with her noisiest toy, as she likes to do when I'm on Zoom. So I just want you to think about that, because I think it makes a big difference. Parents are bringing their children to us to teach them to implement their IEP, and when we can greet them and give them some confidence that we've read it, that we know it, it's not everything about their child. We still want to know more, but it gives them confidence that we have made that effort. And I think that that's a huge thing. How can the tip help us through the year? Well, lesson planning is easier because we've already thought about what our lessons might be, what our activities in our classroom might be that we're going to need to plan for, that are going to be able to match up well with IEP goals. Once we've thought about those tips, we've thought about those activities that are going to lend themselves to teaching those IEP goals. So that gets that brain going, and it becomes easier to think about those lessons. Our progress report panic reduction is important. Hopefully, when we have a tip completed, we have a teaching strategy in place. We've assigned a time during the day when we are doing that teaching, and we have a data collection system in place. And if we're implementing those things, then hopefully we're not spending all night the night before the progress report realizing all of a sudden that we have no data for an objective that we have to assess on the progress report. So hopefully we've ended that progress report panic. And finally, it should be easier to talk about the IEP in meetings, because when there's a problem, we should be able to say, I did this. And then when that wasn't working, I did this. And when that wasn't working, I did this. And all we've done is amend the tip. So we have something we can bring to the meeting and really be able to look at and say, we were teaching it here. This is the strategy. This is how we're taking data. It allows you to have a framework to really articulate what you're doing. And that's just contact information and credits. So those are just some things to think about. And I will put some links in the post of I've got a manual on this. I train on this in the Special Educator Academy and are setting up classes. I've got a manual on using the tip. I've got some posts I can point you to on the blog as well, that have tools for this. And I will point you to those as well. But it's really just, it's really just a form that I use, and it builds this process of building your classroom around the needs of the student. So I want to hear your questions. What are your thoughts? What are your questions? Um, Trying to remember. I did have a question that I was supposed to answer. What it was. How do we get that form? I will put a link to the form in this post when I get offline. When I end this, I will put, it'll be a Dropbox link, because right now that's all I've got it in. I think, yeah, because I don't have it. It doesn't adapt well to Google Forms, but I will put a link to it for you guys. It'll be a PDF, actually, is what it'll be, and maybe I will put it in Google Drive as a PDF, because that might be easier for you guys to access. Um, Thoughts on including other specialists? I absolutely love including other specialists. And in fact, when I used to do the tip, we used to do it as, and I like to do it as, what we call child study, which was basically a team meeting. I just don't talk about it that way because we don't have that opportunity in most situations anymore. I really love to have them um, be part of that process as well, because I love to have that communication. We just don't always have that. We just don't always have that time. Sarah, take a breath. Um, you are not alone. That is definitely not an unusual problem. Hold on just a minute. Let me switch my camera. This is not an unusual problem. And so, what I want you to do is, first of all, take a deep breath, because that's the big thing. The big thing is start with getting to know the kids. That's where I would start, and then you take it one step at a time. That is really the best way. You start by figuring out what types of students you're working with, what their needs are, and then you start taking an assessment of what you have, and then you kind of go from there. And we'll be walking through those different pieces. I'm going to parallel, we do this in a lot more detail with a lot more support. It's part of the Special Educator Academy. We're walking through a study group together with it now. And so I'm going to give you kind of little bits of that as we go. But so I'm going to walk you through a parallel process of that over the next few weeks. So don't get overwhelmed. Just it'll get there. All right. Other questions? All right. Well, if you are watching the recording, definitely share your comments, share your questions in the comments, and I am happy to come back and answer them. Feel free to tag me, and I will do that. I will add a number of links to the um, post as soon as I get off here. And if you have questions as it occurred to you, I will be back next Thursday at 3:30. So come back and we will be talking about creating schedules. All right. Everybody have a good weekend and hope to see you again next Thursday at 3:30. Bye, guys.